Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The God of your moment is with you in this moment. See, your moment will never come at the perfect time or under the perfect circumstances, but you have a perfect God. So what if we thought about our what ifs a little differently? What if our what ifs could be all about our faith? What if instead of our what ifs being about our concerns, what if they could be about our confidence? What if instead of those being our doubt, what if we could make those what ifs our trust? What if we flipped the script on this thing a little bit? That every time I say, what if I mess up, instead I said, what if God shows up? What if instead of saying, what if I don't have what it takes? What if I say, what if God's using this as a setup in the midst of this setback? When I say, what if it's too late? What if instead I say, what if God's doing this just in time? In those moments when I say, what if I'm scared? Instead, what if I said, what if God is doing something wonderful in the midst of this? And I know I can trust him to nurture me and protect me right in the middle of the place where I am. What if we changed our language about the what ifs? What if instead of it being filling us with fear, we allowed it to fill us with trust? What if we asked God to do something big in our life? What if we would shift this in this moment, in this window of time, and allow our what ifs to be something that causes us to trust him more than ever? Well, thanks for joining us. Really glad that you would take this time, and we've been doing these streams to kind of come back around and talk about some subjects that were in the message from the week. Last week's was great with the missionaries, Leah. Thanks, that was a lot of fun and a really cool group. And this week, when I was putting the sermon together, there was a thought that I wanted to hit on, kind of ran out of time. So I think it's really helpful that we have this, time to kind of connect. There's a list that they do every year. It used to come from a university, and I'm not even exactly sure who does it every year now, but it's called the Mindset List. And what it does is it takes like the incoming class of college freshmen and kind of says, hey, this is some things about how they think, that how the world's different from them than maybe it was, say, for those generations before them. So here's a couple of things. Like PayPal has always been an online option for purchasers. So it's a generation that's never not known PayPal. This one I think is really interesting because Richard Reed's explosive footwear at 30,000 feet. Do you remember that, the guy that was going to blow up the plane? Passengers have always had to take off their shoes and slide through security on the ground. So in that, it's just, they've never known a time when, So like Pearl Harbor for their grandparents and the Kennedy assassination for their parents, 9/11 is just an historical event. So they have no personal recollection of 9/11. Wow. The tech big four, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google, are to them what the big three automakers were to their grandparents. Sure. So kind of an interesting thought. This one is my favorite, and I don't know, the list has 60 things on it. So it's the mindset list. It's interesting. This is my favorite. The primary use of a phone has always been to take pictures. So that's this list. But it highlights the things that oftentimes can come in and kind of separate generations. Like things change, and how do we interact? So, a couple of months ago, or kind of, end of last year, there was this whole big deal about how people were always going, oh, millennials, oh, the millennials this and the millennials that. If you want to blame somebody for something, who do you blame? Millennials. Right? Okay, you've heard it? Yeah, okay, yeah. So, and then on the flip side of that, then kind of almost in retaliation, there was this new phrase where people go, okay, boomer, right? Have you heard that? You want to be a certain way, okay, boomer. And then poor Karen, she's been, yeah, right, So you got boomers, and then what, Gen Z, or X, Gen X, which I think is where I'm at. And then you've got millennials, so, and then.
I teeter on the line.
Okay.
Depends on whose article you read.
Yeah, and whose attitude you want to have.
Yeah.
So, right? That's kind of the...
Depends on who's getting made fun of. I can slide.
There you go, come on.
Right? Yeah. And then, so you got boomers, you got Gen X, you got millennials, and then after the millennials, kind of the students of today are Gen Z, right? So you're Gen Z.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so...
Multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah, Gen Z.
A lot of Z.
A lot of Z's after. So with that in mind, like you have all these different generations, right? And what's interesting is for so long, it's been all about the millennials, and that's shifting. Like Gen Z is, you watch advertising, you watch marketing, you watch thoughts, The the whole idea, though, of generations being in different places is not a new thing. Like, I know we make a big deal out of it now, but it's kind of always been a thing. We know this because we've been working through the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus. So practical what Paul writes to the church, probably the most practical things that he writes about church life. And in both 1 Timothy and Titus, he very specifically talks about different generations. So this isn't new, right? This has been an issue for, millennia. So I want to look at a couple of passages there. I want to talk about generations some, but before we do, why do you think that tension often exists between generations? You see it in families, you see it in culture as a whole, and I've been a part of, I wouldn't say so much my experience at Calvary, but in life, I've been in churches where it becomes a real rift. And so, and apparently it was, for Paul to highlight it. So why do you think that there's often a tension between generations?
I was thinking, as you said that, I think a lot of times it's because we forget where we've been. So as you grow up, how's the story go? Like, I had to walk through the snow, uphill both ways to get to school.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not true because you can't go up a hill
where I live.
both ways. But I wonder that if sometimes it's like we forget, so when we're grandparents, we forget what it was like to be in high school and be trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life? Because we've lived all that life, And I'm sure that's not the answer for all of the rifts through time, but I do wonder if that plays a role in it, is we kind of just forget what it was like to be in that stage of life.
And I think too, I think sometimes the older generation gets suspicious of the younger generation because, the older generation might look at, this is stuff that we built, and you're going to change everything, so it must not be good enough for you, or you're going to destroy everything we worked for, those kind of things, when in fact it could be that they're going to take it to the next level, right? But it's just that suspicion, and I think sometimes younger folks look at people, I'll put myself in the older bucket, that they look at people like me as holding on instead of letting go, right? And so hold the position instead of let other people learn to lead, right? And having that depth of character to step back and say, hey, this is your time, go. I'll help you, instead of holding on to it. So I think there's those kind of things. Sometimes people in the older generation, I think, we think we have the depth of wisdom that the young people need, but the young people have the energy and the enthusiasm that we've lost, and so we kind of get wrapped around those things. And I think there's just it all boils down to relationship. Like, am I willing to listen to somebody else or not? Am I willing to invest in someone else or not? And I'm sure we'll get into that tonight. So.
I think it's if you can take time to put through that relationship, put yourself in a position to see it from their perspective.
Yeah.
Because like you said, that's a great example of we built all this and now you guys are coming in and changing it, and to just take time and look at it from their perspective, they did take a lot of time and effort. Let's just say it's a house, right? And then we come in, James and I just bought an old house, and I'm like, let's paint the fireplace. And he's like, I don't think the people who built it 100 years ago want you painting it. And,
God bless him.
But there is that perspective of it was probably a lot of work to build that, as I haven't painted it yet. But it's taking time to be in that, to see it from their perspective.
We'll get to some submission topics here before this is over. So, yeah, for sure. So
I think you said the word change, and that's a big part of it, right? If any study, it says that we live in the most accessible time in all of society, right? Kids nowadays know more information faster than any of us at the table could ever find out. So it's like that two-edged sword, where I'm glad they have information, but sometimes I hate it because I think they're so smart. Because you make a statement that's not what Google says. I don't care about Google. I had to be there and I saw it happen. So I think it's an honest thing where a lot of kids coming up now think they know more because it's accessible, but knowledge isn't everything. And I think we can agree on that. I learned a whole lot in school that when right at the door, when I had to go through a real life experience, said, that's not what I had to do in that moment, right? So I think it's a great tension, right? Because because I'm so glad for technology, I'm so glad for these things, but sometimes it takes us away from the ability to connect with people. Because we have a generation, from before, who have had to walk through some really crazy experiences. Though it's not what we're going through now, it was in their own right, a growing moment. And so now the generation that comes up now, I think finding a balance is so important, and recognizing that change is inevitable. It's been happening since Adam, till now. Things have always changed. I think the response, even as a church, is so how do we address change, and how do we make change work for us and not divide us? Is a big thought in my head. We talk about generations.
So I think, and that's a good springboard into then, I think part of what maybe Paul was trying to say to Timothy, right? So he talks to Timothy and he talks to Titus. And it seems like in Timothy he talks about the relationships of the generations, and then in Titus he talks about kind of the roles. So let's look at Timothy first. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 1, he's talking to Timothy who's pastoring the church in Ephesus, right? And he says, "Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity." So it's interesting. He kind of breaks us down into one of four categories based on gender and age. So like older men, older women, younger women. And if you were to say, "Pastor, where are the lines in that?" I would say that's up for you to decide. I'm not going there. Age is just a number, right? However, the reality is, and I might say I'm 48, right? And I feel like I'm in this unique season that I've not been in before, where some of this is starting to shift in my life, right? Now, let's just get something straight. I've never been better than I am today, right? And the best is yet to come. But I do know it's like, okay, some of this changes in my life as my life changes. And I think that's probably true every decade. I think that's probably true in your own personal development. But so he gives this interesting diagram here. What do you think Paul was saying specifically to Timothy in these verses? Like what, if you have to think through not just the book of 1 Timothy or why he wrote these things, but as he's writing it, what do you think Paul had in mind to say that?
I think he was telling us to be mindful of who you're around, because sometimes that first phrase, right? I remember reading it, looking at it, "Do not rebuke an older man harshly," because if you read, I think 1 Timothy 5 verse 12, it tells us to rebuke people. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, wait, did he lose his mind? Like, is Paul like, why did he say? But the key word's harshly.
Yeah.
So it's know who you're around, and be respectful of people. Because sometimes, like, as human beings, like we forget that, hey, like there's a certain amount of respect we owe human beings. So he's saying, hey, as an older man, like who's been through life, learn to respect him. That doesn't mean he's always going to be right. So a few verses later, he goes, hey, if the man's wrong, correct him. But watch your words and how you say it to him, right?
That's good.
So I think as I'm reading these different areas, I think he's just saying, hey, be intentional of who you're around, and don't think you're too good that you don't have to correct yourself around certain people.
Yeah.
All right,
good.
that's kind of what pops through my mind.
Well, I think
That's really good.
What you were saying about relationship is it's giving us some guidelines for like how to have relationship with certain groups of people, and so like the do not, so if I have, older men in my life that are maybe, part of the church or part of the community, that these are some guidelines for me of how to handle that part of my relationships.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Like you said, Pastor Bill, you said older people can be wrong, right? And so that whole idea of respect doesn't mean, oh, you're always right or I always defer to you. It says I respect your opinion, but guess what? You could be wrong. And how I talk to that person is showing respect, not that I agree with you all the time. Our society could use that a lot today. But I think interesting to me is that Paul's helping Timothy know that you can't just use your position of authority to influence somebody.
That's really good.
And so like Timothy was pastor at Ephesus, right? And so Paul's writing this young pastor who obviously had some challenges, right? And so he's like, don't try to flex your organizational muscle here, right? Do it influence with relationship. That's how you're going to make inroads. And without that relationship, your effectiveness is limited. And so he kind of emphasized the need for the relationship more so than the position. And I think that's another thing our culture could really use in today's world for sure.
That's awesome.
And I think you really hit on something there, because you think about it, Timothy is an outsider. His only credentials coming in there is Paul brought him, right? And he's young. So he's got something he's got to navigate there, and there must have been some kind of tension, because at some point Paul says to Timothy, this is 1 Timothy 4:12, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. So somewhere there must have been, but then to your point he says, but set an example for the believers in, right? He hits that. So yeah, man, good stuff. So when you think about all those things we just said, what do you learn about the relationship among generations in these verses? Because this one, he's really talking to Timothy about how you view the other generations, not so much how a generation views itself. So what do you make of that relationship?
Well, I mean, I kind of think that Paul's I think he's telling us at least 3 or 4 things here. He's saying you need to honor the life experience of the elders. So the people that have lived the life ahead of you, even if you don't always agree with them or they're not always right, there's something you can learn from them. I found that to be true in my life. There's people that have lived, things that I might not agree with everything they did, but I can sure learn from them. And so I can honor them in that way. I think the other thing is encourage the enthusiasm of the younger person. So don't squelch that. Don't be so afraid about the big ideas that they might have, because probably you had big ideas when you were their age too. So don't quench that. Recognize the value that diversity brings in the discussion. It's easy for us to gather people around us that look like us, act like us, all of that, when in reality what Paul's talking about here is older, younger, men, women, right?
Yeah.
All this diversity, and that brings a lot of value. And then I think just that one caveat that Paul puts in here with absolute purity. I think we have to be mindful that it's a temptation to use our position wherever we're at in that continuum of people for our own selfish motives, and we have to watch our purity, that we don't try to leverage somebody or do things in the wrong way.
Because if any of those are going to affect Timothy as a young man, it's going to be trying to flex on an older man, so you can rebuke him, but not harshly. Or it's going to try to be flex on some pretty young thing, and he says, "Hey, that's your sister, and you better watch yourself." Right? I mean, you're right. He very much kind of hits that. That's really good, really good. He talks about our relationships there, and then he does something different with Titus. So we don't know as much about the church in Crete, other than we know that they were kind of shady, right? We talked about that a few weeks back, and some interesting folks. And then when he talks about the generations there, now he talks about the roles of each generation. So let's jump ahead to Titus chapter 2, verse 1. He says, "But as for you, Titus, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness." Pretty good list, older men, right? "Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women," now he makes a little shift here, "to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands." This will be fun. "That the word of God may not be reviled." And verse 6, "Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled." So he gives the old 1-2 punch to each one of those generations. He gets really specific here regarding each of the generations. Why do you think he does that? Like, why do you think he goes into so much detail in those verses? Like, he could have been more broad, but he's really clear to go, you and you and you. So what do you think the purpose of that is?
I think context is a lot of it too.
Yeah.
And so, considering what's happening at the time at the church, we know there's some shady stuff happening there, right? Just based on the little bit we know about the church. And so I'm just imagining Paul's like, look, I know this is not the best setting for you, but it's important for you to know and to help your people know, hey, what would help us become not just a better church, but just better people?
Yeah.
So I think Paul's really trying really hard to help, hey, Titus, look, you're going to have to be the one that helps steer the ship. Because from the outside perspective, it's going down quick, and it's sinking, right? So Paul's like, hey, listen, man, if you can get this mindset, if you believe this and get people to believe this with you, that, hey, this is what a good man in this neighborhood would do for a church? Can you imagine like when you're going to like, I'm not gonna name like the worst city in like the country, right? There's like this debauchery and sin and everything happening there. And the first thing you have to do is try to rework culture, right? Like building a house won't do anything until you get people to believe they belong in the house.
Yeah.
Right, so I think Paul here, a lot of this, why, I asked a question too, because a lot of this, like, and we'll probably get into it, like, it's like, that's some crazy stuff he's saying here, like, that's kind of extreme, Paul, but we got to understand that Paul's addressing a people who need, like, desperate saving and a shift of culture. Like, they need to turn from wicked ways, right, and find hope again.
Yeah.
And this is not the context for everybody, just so we're clear, right? Like, this is not everybody's context, but Paul was really intentional to say that if we're going to see a better outcome here, like, we got to be on the same page here.
And helping people, I think, to identify, like, that's huge, right? Because I know there's certain things that I know not instinctively, and that I know maybe even not because of my environment or experience, but because I had to learn them from someone else. I think that's really true. Back to your point, anytime there's change, right? Yeah. So when I moved to Wisconsin, I didn't know this on the front end, but when I moved to Wisconsin, I had to learn you always revere the Packers. Right? Like, you have to know that. And I didn't know that going in, but that change in my life, I had to learn that. And I think that's huge that he's hitting that there. And that you embrace the different seasons that you're in. You know, there's beauty and purpose in each season. Like, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this was, I think sometimes we go, I wish I was in a different season, or I wish I was back in another season. Sure. And there's something in the season you're in. So, okay, let's do some application then. With these verses, what do they mean for 2020? Let's talk first about older men. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Anything there just kind of...
Yeah, I think so. One thing I would say about the last thing too, and we don't have to belabor that too long, but I think what Paul said to Titus also makes it sustainable. So, one of the tasks he sent Titus to do was to establish leadership in Crete, right? You haven't done that yet, do it now. And now he comes behind and says, here's how you do that sustainably. You start with the older people and you train the young people, and then they can train the next young, right? So it's sustainable, I think, too.
That's really good.
The application, like for old guys like me, don't sit back and take pot shots at the younger generation. Be the wisdom that they need to seek out. And the note that I wrote myself just as a reminder, nobody likes a grumpy old man. And so that's the thing, right, is I need to make myself available, and so that young people feel like, A, they can come and they want to hang out with somebody like of my generation.
That's great.
Come on. That's good. Drop the mic on that, yeah. Okay, then he goes to older women. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's just so clearly saying, kind of like, don't just in that season invest nothing, but like invest your experience into the generation that's coming behind you. I mean, I know it clearly says to teach, but I mean, even just like in the, not slandering and, being a slave to wine, like those are like, don't just like give up and be like, all right, well, I've done my time, my duties are finished, but take that time and really be able to invest in that next generation, because there is a lot of change happening in the younger generations as they are learning, what does marriage look like, and what does it look like to raise kids? What does it look like to be a mom who works and takes care of a house and takes care of kids? And there's people who did it before us. And so I think, it's saying to the older women, like, invest in this younger generation, because you have so much to offer.
Well, and I think to your point, like both to the older men and the older women, he does one more in the positive, one more in the negative. But he is saying, I think those things you're saying, hey, look, you know the behavior you could slip into if you really aren't focused on anything next, or if you're too settled into yourself. Don't do that. Like that idea of slandering and a slave to much wine, both of those things are responses from people who, in a certain sense, are what's the word I'm looking for? settled.
Well, it's easy to become complacent.
Yeah.
And I think that some of it goes to like that conversation we're having about the different generations. Is it sometimes I think can be easy for the older generation to say, well, they have it. Whether it's because the attitude of the younger generation says, we got it, we don't need your help. But that isn't also always the case. I think sometimes the younger generation is trying to, what they say, fake it until you make it. You know, they're trying to look like they know what they're doing, but I think it's really easy for that older generation to say, well, they must not need us anymore, or you know, and sometimes you'll be asked to like step up, but I think sometimes you just have to show up and say, hey, I'm here. And I want to be available and I want to be helpful.
Okay, let's pause there for just a minute, because there's a very clear message here that if an older generation has something, there's a calling to kind of pass it on to the next. And oftentimes we go, I don't have anything to give, like I don't have anything to offer. Or we take rejection in one place and apply it to every place.
Sure, yeah.
So I've seen people go, well, nobody cares what I think. Sometimes in part, based on the fact that maybe within their own family, they don't have a voice of influence, or within the workplace, they don't have the same value. But to go, I know God will show me someplace. And I just think of a couple that the three of us were just talking with over the weekend.
Yeah.
And I think of the way that they said, God, we have this. How can you help us to share it here?
Yeah.
And have watched, you know, multiple younger folks that they've invested in, because they opened up their home and they opened up their lives. And the impact's huge.
And I think something that you just said is so important, that sometimes the biggest impact you have isn't in your family. And I think that's hard for us because we want to like be able to have raised amazing children, and we want to be able to have done all these things, or be grandparents who have grandkids that, you know, come over and you make the cookies, you do all the things, but like I think so often you can almost like invest more, because it's a different kind of relationship. You know, I think there's something special about our family units, but there's something so special about a person who takes time to invest in someone who you don't have to, because I'm not related to you. You don't have to love me, like you choose to do that. And I think there can be such, I mean, I think of just my time in South Africa, and I had my South Africa parents, you know, and that was a place where I went to, you know, hang out if there was holidays and things. But they invested so much in me, but not because I was their daughter by birth, like they didn't have to, but they called me their kid all the time, you know, and there's quite a few families, even just through my life, whether it was here in Toledo and other places. I have another friend who something just happened, and she said, oh, I need all 4 of my girls to be there. And I was like, she's only got 3 girls. And then I was like, oh, she's talking about me. I'm the 4th one.
Wow.
You know, and that, I think that makes the relationship so special.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in that space where you, and especially as you become into this older category, sometimes your life frees up. That couple you speak of is like they had more time now. You've gotten done raising your kids to a certain level, and you have more time. But I think there's something so valuable in that we do not always remember to look for.
Yeah. Okay, younger women. He says young women, the older women are to train the young women too, so here's the model. Love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Not everything there is popular. So moving along, let's see what he says. What's your take on Paul's encouragement to Titus and the young ladies in Crete?
I think some of it's like context, like you were saying. Sure. You know, the context in that culture was a little bit different. But I think it's, having to learn how to apply these things to our, to our current world. You know, like the working at home is working at home is a big one. Well, in that context, that's what women did. You know, they worked at home. They weren't. I don't think they were allowed to work outside the home. And so in this world, it's completely different. And the amount of unbelievable moms who manage a full-time career and kids and like baseball schedules and still like bake brownies, and like I don't understand how people get all that done. and you know what I mean? But I think that it's still applying some of the things to be kind and to love even through those things. So it's just applying it to the context that we find ourselves in this culture.
I think we have to be careful, because especially in the pastoral epistles, those are the passages that oftentimes people want to pull out like a club and say, women don't talk, women this, women that. When, back to context, right? Paul was talking about some specific issues in the churches in Ephesus and in Crete, And you know, especially in Ephesus, when you get to the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, where the big sword is, you know, wives submit to your husbands, you know. But then you go a couple more verses and it says, husbands, love your wives the way Christ loves the church. So don't submit to your wife, die for her, right? There's something different that's there that it's teamwork, it's mutual love, and the whole passage in Ephesians is built on mutual submission, right? And so I think oftentimes we want to take these verses and use them like a club, when Paul was using them like a scalpel to do surgery in that church and the issues they were working with. So yeah.
And I think too that Paul's just affirming that men and women have such important roles in their families.
Right.
And you know, Paul's not listing out the only things that men and women can do.
Sure.
He's just saying these are the kinds of things. And what draws my eyes is this idea of love and kindness and purity and those kind of things that, you know, a lot of times, I know in our house, that's the way. Cindy's the glue, right? She's the glue. She provides the love and the kindness that I'm just a dumb engineer and I don't see it. I just don't see it, but she feels it. She brings the feeling into the family, and I would miss that if she didn't bring that. And I think Paul's just helping us see that everybody brings something to the party.
Yeah, that's great.
And he's very targeted here. He says, older guys in Crete, you got to be more dignified, like the way you're handling yourself. And older women in Crete, here's a couple of things you probably need to stop saying the things you're saying, because that's slander, right? And he's saying to the younger women, this is one of the things that I read when I was looking at this passage, like when it talks about some of those things that are a part of their role and holding people together, that in that culture, they'd started to do it begrudgingly. Like there wasn't love for their family, there was, you know, a obligation. And this is, he's saying, look, embrace the season that you're in. I think he's saying that to everybody here. And then to the young men, must have been an issue in Crete. Likewise, urge the young men to be self-controlled, period. So like you know, everybody else got all these things. And I, as a former young man, sometimes self-control is the best I can do, right? You know, and so, but then I also think it's interesting because what is Titus? If he's fallen in one of those categories, which one do we think he is? He's a young man. So then verse 7, he says, teach them to be self-controlled. Now you, as one of them, show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works. And in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. And he's saying, look, young men, live a life that's of value and respect, that it's a role model, that you show integrity and dignity. And so it's really key. Yeah.
It's totally key.
So in each season, there's something there for us.
Yeah, for
Very
sure.
much.
Okay, so one kind of wrap-up question then. Unless there's, I don't want to step on top of anybody, but one wrap-up question. I'd love it, and you don't have to, but if you have something, I'd love to hear, can you share a significant, kind of impactful, intergenerational relationship that you've had in your life? Could be going either way. But anybody got one that you can drop?
The thing that just came to my mind, I mean, really quick, was my mom's father, so my grandfather, he really wasn't a Christian person until very late in his life, like nearly at the end of his life. So I was already grown by that time. But I was a little kid, and they lived just, I don't know, 2 or 3 houses down the street from us. And so I'd wander down there. This was, you know, it was safe to do so in my town. It was so small, you know. I would wander down there and just hang out with him. Just hang out. You know, he'd be doing stuff in his basement, and I'd just be with Grandpa, you know. Or he'd be out in his garden and, you know, weeding it or digging it up, and I'd be with him, just hang out, and he'd let me eat, you know, like peppers or something if it was, you know, ready to go. And so he really didn't influence me so much from a Christian perspective. But that's the guy, I mean, my dad was great too, but Grandpa was really, he was like soft-spoken, gentle guy. He was dedicated to his wife. He worked until he was like in his 80s just to take care of everything. He was just this guy that was just modeled what it was like to be a gentle, strong, responsible man. And I had good examples of that in my life, but I never saw him angry. Like I saw him mad, like he was mad when something would happen, but I never saw him react out in anger. And he was just somebody that I just loved to hang around with, and that was really intergenerational. But it was just so impactful to me just to have that thing, that visual, just to see that you can be a really good person, and you don't have to be the guy that's yelling and screaming. So it was really good for
really
me.
good.
Yeah.
I've had a few, but the one that first comes to my mind is like when I went to college. Like I called her like my college mom.
Yeah.
Like, she was like the director of the music program, and so like even when I left to go to college and get a degree in music, like if I'm being very, and I'm not, this is like false humility. Like I wasn't good. Like I think I was one of the first people at the university to turn in a completely blank entrance music exam.
Huh.
I didn't know anything. I got a 0 on the entrance music test because I didn't know what a whole note or a half note. Like I was like 17 and I knew God had called me to use music.
Huh.
And so I said, well, if God wants me to do it, I'm gonna go. Not realizing that I need some basic information to know this stuff. So I get to college, right? And I go, and I didn't like, oh, entrance exam. I was like, okay, maybe I can do that. I'm a good test taker,
Yeah.
but not when it's a foreign language. Like it was like I was reading in French. And I was like, what are these little circles and closed ones and dots? And so I remember handing it to her, and then a few days later, she called me into her office, and she's like, hey, like, are you sure this is what you want to be doing? And I was like, I know God's called me. And she's like, well, if God's called you, she's like this sweet Southern lady, right? This old Southern lady. She's Dr. Robbins now. She was Miss Robbins then. And I was like, and for the next 5 years, she showed me more grace and belief than anybody ever did in college. Like I'd be in basic musicianship with the hoodie on in the back corner falling asleep because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And she would never let me quit. And so I ended up excelling in theory. And something about her believing in me and giving me a chance changed it for me. Like, and I don't know if she knows how impactful it was for me, but she never gave. She saw something in me at 17 that I was ready to quit at week 1 because I thought I lost my mind. I heard God wrong for sure. But when she heard that God called me, she says, well, if that's the case, I'm going to help you get there. And I can say, like, I wouldn't be the pastor I am today. I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't have made the impact I have over the years if it wasn't for Dr. Robbins years ago, seeing a 17-year-old kid who fell asleep in her class way more times than I should have, who cut her class more, and she'd just be like, listen, Bindle, you got to get here. And over 5 years, she's loved me, showed me grace. And I'm telling you, like, I never realized the impact she made on my life. I remember, like, it was her ability just to love me, correct me with grace and love. But and the thing is, she always corrected me. Like, she never let me slide, which I loved about her. But she was always like, that's not how we're doing it. And it was something about those years of having an older, established, respected individual say, Bindle, you can do this. You know, for me, it's like, sometimes and so for me, my whole life goal is to help young guys realize you can do it.
That's good.
Like I've told God, I was like, God, if till the day I die, whether I can sing or anymore, I want to make sure God, I have the ability to see in guys and girls, right, to be able to see in them what God's put in them. Because Dr. Robbins saw something in me I didn't see in myself.
That's really good.
And I think sometimes as like pastors and regular people, everyone, right, not just pastors, but everybody, we have the ability to help people get somewhere they can never get if we just believe in them.
There you go.
And that's what changed my life.
That's really cool. Really cool.
No, I'm not going to call any names out because I feel like if I do, people will think I'm saying they're old, and that's not what I'm saying.
Whoa.
But I've had I can think through my life, several different people who so strongly have showed me what it's like to love and to kind of love through like that hospitality arm. Because of the way that, especially when I was doing missions and was traveling a lot, and so I was in a lot of people's homes, whether it was for many visits or short times, but kind of that just that example of what it's like to open your whole life and give everything you have to somebody, and really to challenge me to say, like, how do you show hospitality and love through that hospitality, and I can think of a couple people who like I even said to you a couple years ago, like, I need to go to this place because it refreshes my soul. Because when you're in that space, you're like, you think like, I'm the only thing that matters, and sometimes you need that to recharge yourself, and And just that attitude of like, we're gonna just love you and shower you with that love, and you don't get that every day in your life as you just do normal life. And so I think those are some people that I can really think of have influenced the way that I hope to be, and I don't always do that, but like working on that. So yeah.
Well, and I would say, like, wherever you are, whatever season you're in, like, pray that God will give you that right connection, whether it's the person you can pour into or the person you need to pour into you. Like, I'll be forever thankful for the 3 years, straight out of college. We spent 3 years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on staff at Evangel Assembly of God there. And, David Arnett, who is, probably the generation above me, just spoke into my life in such a clear way that honestly, as a pastor, I just quoted him on Sunday. Like I hear his voice in my head every day. Like what he poured into my life those 3 years. And then on our staff, John Wanamaker, who was a retired minister, who did part-time, pastoral care and ministry there, showed me how a minister can finish well with a life that is just filled with grace and joy, and even in spite of like some really tough things. And so, like, I'll be forever grateful for those things. And to your point, Pastor Bennell, I want to do the same. Like, I want to be able to offer that same. So, hey, thanks. This was really insightful, and thanks for watching. We talked longer than we thought we would, but I think some really insightful things and an important topic for us to allow God to work in our hearts and be sensitive where we may find ourselves. So, thanks for watching. If you want to share this, tell somebody about it, pass this along. Let them know if it was helpful for you. Comment as well. We'd love to know how it helped you. God bless you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.